Good day everybody. Today I'm going to show you how I deal with oil change on my KTM Superduke 990. Oil change is one of the very basic skills that all of you should have. It's really not rocket science, it's really very simple. Oil change on the regular bike, it's 1, 2, 3 system really, you know, drain the oil, replace the filter, put it back new oil. On the KTM Superduke 990, it's slightly different. There's a few more steps in between because the KTM developed the engine with a dry sump. Without going into too many details, basically the oil is pumped from the engine bay to the oil tank. I think I read somewhere that was developed not by the KTM. The dry sump was developed for the race cars. They're going around the circle, and the centrifugal force was pushing the oil to the one side of the engine bay, and it wasn't lubricated enough engine through the race, and the engine was seizing up. So they developed a dry sump, so the oil is constantly pumped to the oil tank and then distributed to the engine to provide the best possible lubrication. I may be wrong. Don't quote me on that. Double check yourself. But it's basically a system developed for race bikes or race cars. What it means for me? Well, it means I need to take 2 or 3 extra steps to change the oil successfully on my KTM Superduke 990. This is how I do it. Welcome back. I'm not a trained mechanic. Everything I learn I've done myself. Always have manual to refer to the manual when you're doing work like this. If you're unsure, seek help with professional. It's simple as that. But I'm confident I can do it on my bike. I'm doing it for myself. If anything goes wrong, it's my life on the line. Don't do what I do. Let's do this. First things first, make sure the bike is secure. This is my paddock stand at the moment. Strap it down if you can, so it doesn't fall on you. Be safe when you work on it. Obviously, good practice is to warm up the engine beforehand and let it cool down slightly so the oil is more runny and it can be drained easier. I already done that. Let's just crack on with the job itself. First thing I want to do is remove some furniture from the bike. So the belly panel and the right hand side, that's the left one, is exactly the same on the other side. The panel is necessary to remove that to complete that process, so I'm going to crack on with that. With the right hand side panel out of the way, I like to remove the oil filler cap over here just to allow the oxygen to get in there, and it's going to be easier to drain. Once this is out of the way, a 19mm socket should remove the main bolt holding the oil from the engine just fine. Cracked it open. Be careful, it may be hot if you run the engine. Put the container underneath and catch it all. There's a washer. Make sure you don't lose it. While you're at it, inspect the magnetic plug for any kind of metal shavings. If you've got a lot of them, it's not great. If you've got just few, that's probably normal. I think I'm running safe here. I'm gonna let it drain for a little bit. In the meantime, you can crack on with the other side. Now I believe it's time to drain the oil from the oil tank. There's a drain board over here, and there's a hose basically with the screen inside as well, right here. And it's all good opening this up, but you got all the battery and cables and plugs and electrics, you know, right directly underneath. And I've done this mistake a number of times. You just open it up, oil drips all over the fucking place, and you got hell of a time later cleaning it up. Same over here, there's a oil filter located right there. You remove it, a bit of oil comes out and it oozes all over the pipes and the connectors. The only tip I can give you guys is a cling film, not cling film, sorry, aluminium foil. I use the heavy duty one. Fuck the cheap shit. So basically what I do, I create some kind of a funnel protective guide over the wires, over the cables, over the connections. This way I open this up and oil drips all over this place. Put my container underneath. Happy days, no need to clean up. I get rid of this, put in the bin. Job done. And as you can see, majority of oil is actually held in here and not in the engine itself. For the hose and the screen that's inside, it is difficult to put any kind of sockets on it. So a good old 8mm spanner do the job just fine. That's if you don't fucking drop it in the oil. There it is. It helps keeping your tools in your hands and not in the old oil container. But hey ho, what do you know? Fuck ups happen every day. There you go, clean. Let's try again. That's better. So there's a little ball bearing over there. Give it a good clean, inspect for any damage, and as the manual states, if necessary, replace it. But it looks good to me. If you put your finger inside there, you can pull out an oil screen. Again, inspect for any crap, and if it's damaged, replace it. But mine looks pretty good. I give it a good clean and put it back in where it belongs. There's a rubber O-ring over there, don't lose it. Again, inspect for damage, replace if necessary. This one is a good nick, so I'm going to keep it. And last but not least, there's an oil screen on the other side of the bike. We're on the right hand side of the bike over here. Again, same thing, bit of foil, aluminium foil over the exhaust. It's not like it's going to get super messy, but it just helps. Later on when you start it up, the oil burns from the exhaust, unpleasant smell, and it's just not necessary, is it? Let's get it off. This little thing, again, inspect, clean, replace if necessary. And that will be it for the steps we need to take to drain the oil and remove all the components for clean. Now we need to do the same thing in the reverse order. If you ever get confused about it, because it looks kind of the same from both ends, excuse the wind, it says here, top. On the other side it says KTM. So the top obviously goes to top. All the way in. It's a good idea to give all these parts a good clean while they're off the bike. Make sure there's no contamination, no sand, no debris from the road or from the garage floor gets back in there. That's going back on the bike. Another important part, and I mean extremely important part, don't skip this part over here, and I'll tell you why in a minute. It's to torque it up to the manufacturer's spec. KTM manual says in this very case, these little bolts go to 10 Newton meters. No more, no less. One click is enough, and I'll tell you why. So how I learned about significance of a torque wrench? Well, it's very simple. About 3 years ago probably, me and a friend of mine we planned a little trip on the bikes through Wales. It was about 3, maybe 4 days. We planned to do about 600-700 miles on the bikes. And a few days before that trip, I decided to change the oil ready for the trip. It was due anyway, so I thought I'd do it, and I'd done it. And at the time I didn't know the torque wrench. And when I was changing the filter over here, this one, put a cover back on, and I put some of these screws in, and I over tightened one of them to the point it snapped. I didn't know it at the time, but it must have snapped just slightly. And on the second day of our trip, that little screw head gave up and it popped completely, which means that little cover over here from the oil filter was hanging on the one bolt, the bottom one, meaning oil was pissing out from all over here, all over the engine parts, all over my boot, to a point I couldn't even change the gear at one point. I didn't realize at the time. Couldn't even change the gear because my boot was slipping, my motorcycle boot was slipping from the gear lever. And obviously my rear tire got completely covered in oil, and I mean soaked cover in oil. My rear brake, rear tire, everything. Luckily I realized fast enough and I switched the engine off. Obviously that delayed our trip by a whole day, because I got recovered to the garage. The garage was closed, it was in the evening. In the morning they couldn't help me because they were fully booked. Luckily they lent me some tools. They let me drill so I can drill this bolt out. They had oil, I bought oil from them. I used their paddock stand, I used their saw and stuff, you know. They gave me some tools basically, they were very helpful this way. So I fixed the bike myself in a car park. However, if that bolt snapped half an hour before we were riding, we were on the motorway doing speeds of exceeding 70 miles an hour, and if that happened then, I don't know if I'll be here right now talking to you guys. Luckily that happened, you know, on a little coast road, you know, by the sea. We were doing 30 miles an hour at that time, and I only traveled about 200 meters when I realized the bolt snapped. Well, what happened? The oil was pissing all over the show. But as I said, if it happened half an hour before that on the motorway, the rear tire covered completely with oil, I don't think I'll survive that. So yeah guys, the next day I came back to Cambridge. I got myself a really good torque wrench and I learned how to use it. Very important skill. Don't ever underestimate the manufacturer specifications to torque these bolts to the right specs. Very, very important. Loose is equally as dangerous as over tightened because of what I just told you. Anyway, carry on. This bad boy goes back in here. And again, them little bolts need to be torqued up to manufacturer specification, which again happens to be 10 Newton meters. Now the drain bolt can go back to bottom of the oil tank, and the screen can go back to the bottom of the tank over here as well. Followed by the actual hose. And last but not least, the drain bolt can come back where it came from, which is down here by the exhaust. And again, I'll be tightening this up to the manufacturer's spec. A little tip again, if you can, do everything by fingers first, by hand. Make sure you don't cross thread it, and then when it's fully seated in, you can nip it up. And once we double and triple check everything, it's time to refill the engine with oil. Which oil are we using? Well, it depends obviously on your riding style, on the riding conditions, and the ambient temperature and all that stuff. I would say stick with fully synthetic. That's the first thing to stick with. And my personal recommendation would be, don't go balls out on super expensive oil. I don't. I'd rather change it more frequently, you know, rather than going balls out buying super expensive stuff and change it once a year. I'd rather go slightly cheaper, you know, not bottom of the shelf, but slightly cheaper, and change it twice as more often. I think that's more beneficial for your engine anyway. Now, how much oil we're going to put in here? According to the manual, KTM manual, they say fill it up with 2.5 liters and then start the engine, wait 20 seconds and fill it up, top it up until this little bar on the side shows you is in the middle. Now, from my personal experience, 2.5 liters is not enough. I'm going to follow the manual, but in the end I'm going to end up using 3.6, maybe 3.8 liter of oil. Depends how much I drain it, you know. But let's do 2.5 like KTM recommend, and then we take it from there. There we go, 2.5 liters of oil in the tank. Let's start the engine up, get it running a little bit. Things to look for is that little tube over here on the left hand side of the bike. It's got maximum and minimum marks, and obviously if the bike is put, it's leveled, not on the side stand, you can see the levels dropping. Don't know how well the cameras pick it up, but the levels dropping, and it's right in between the min and max side right now. Obviously check it with the engine been running for a little bit, and then leave it to cool down just ever so slightly, so the oil drips down from the engine and everything. But that's basically what you want to go for, right in the middle of them two marks. If the engine is put on the side stand, that's going to give you false reading because it's dropping up to one side, but it needs to be leveled, and that's basically what you're going for. Yet again, KTM recommended 2.5 liters and then top it up all the way through. But from a previous experience, it takes more like 3.5 liters. At the moment, I think I put 3.4 liters of oil into the engine. I'm going to keep an eye on it for the next couple of days. Make sure it's leveled up properly, everything is filled up. Make sure there's no leaks or anything like that. Other than that, happy days. We're done here. So there you go. This is how I change oil on my KTM. Whether that's right or wrong way, that's a completely different story. I own this bike for I think 6 years right now, and never had a problem apart from that one day in Wales when I completely fucked up. You learn from your own mistakes. Guys, be safe out there. Hope that helps, and once again, thank you very much for watching. Rock hard, have a beer, and we see you very soon.